Welcome back. We're discussing the plight of the millions of displaced Colombians who've been forced from their homes because of the continued fighting there. Here for the discussions is Ruby Castaño, a displaced Colombian who's organizing relief efforts for the Women's Department of Colombia's national coordinating body for the displaced. Maria Emma Wills, the chairwoman for the Gender Research Unit of the Historical Memory Commission of the University of the Andes in Bogota. And Virginia Bouvier, a senior program officer with the Grants and Fellowship Program at the United States Institute of Peace. And as I get back to the debate, let me get in Virginia Bouvier here again and ask about the effort made by the international community to do something. I mean, there's an email we had, if I can put this to you. It came in from our Facebook webpage from Eli Bariki Kilewo, who says, the UN hasn't been effective enough. It should hold OAS and Chavez responsible for the drug money that has been funding FARC. I mean, what role, for example, could the UN be playing, a greater role be playing in Colombia?
Well, I think the UN is playing a role in Colombia in terms of the UN Food Program and various other agencies that are trying to coordinate efforts and increase support to the displaced people. I think there is one issue that I'd like to bring up. You know, traditionally, the question of internal displacement has been viewed differently from the issue of refugees. It's often been assumed that a national government has responsibility for what happens in its borders. I think attitudes are shifting in this regard, and there's much more of a moral imperative that says that if this kind of displacement is taking place and the government is not taking responsibility for it, that indeed the international community should be intervening in some way to assist the people who are not getting assistance from their governments. But you have, I think, a little bit of a lag time where international structures have not quite caught up in terms of how to handle displacement and whether it should be handled in the same way that refugees are handled. You do see a number of international NGOs that have begun to take a leadership role. Groups like Refugees International, for example, have had several delegations down to look at the question of displacement in Colombia and have produced some excellent reports and really good recommendations. I think the national government has the first obligation, but if the national government is not able to meet the demands and the needs of the displaced people, I think the international community does need to step in.
Ruby, how is the majority of the Colombian population reacting to what's happening? Because if roughly 10% of the people in the country are being displaced, it must be causing friction in the communities. All the people coming into the cities looking for work because they've been displaced, the begging, these issues, how is it dividing the Colombian people? How do they feel about it?
At this
time, as displaced persons, we have sought alternatives in an effort to find solutions, joining together our organizations of displaced persons. This has helped us a great deal because we have centralized, so to speak, the whole issue nationally of the loss of lands, the dispossession of lands, what is happening with our lands, what economic development is going forward in these territories. But at the same time, through our organizations, we have also undertaken to identify the differential impact of displacement on women, and we have made an effort for women to massively join these organizations so that in turn we can seek to give greater visibility to the situation of the very profound impact of displacement on our families, on our lands, and generally on the national economy. For we are the ones who have been producing food in the Colombian countryside. Through these processes and the strategies that us displaced persons have formulated, specific forums have been constituted for a displaced population to engage with the government. We have spoken with the government, but the government has been very limited in terms of listening to our issues or incorporating it into the overall formulation of public policy so as to benefit the displaced population. We, specifically women, right now have been in the context of making demands and giving visibility to our issues. We have come together to tell the world about what is happening because in Colombia no policies have been developed to uphold women's rights, much less so in our current situation when it comes to defending our rights or our right to possess our lands, the whole issue of dispossession of lands, and having disappeared practically from the social, political, and economic framework in Colombia.
Maria Emma, you'd raised the issue of being ethical, being legal, presumably because of lack of documentation. There are issues in people proving that they own the land. Presumably there's a lot of corruption because there's vested large big business interests as well and large amounts of money as well. But where does the responsibility lie? Who should be doing something right now to try to help these people? Is it the government alone? I mean, the US is spraying crops, for example, and I think that's caused displacement, drug crops.
Yes, it has caused displacement, but I think that the first responsibility lies in the government. The government should be providing the institutional setting for the people to have their land back. Many people who've been to the cities want to go back to the land because it's not a kind of people who've been in the land do not adapt to cities easily. The younger generation maybe, but most of them want to go back to their land. So the land problem is one of the major ones. And I just wanted to give you figures because I think that they're shocking. In the war, 5 million hectares have been lost because of dispossession, because of displacement. Who owns those 5 million hectares? The war has made a sort of concentration of the land, which was not very nice before the war started. So I think the land problem is at the heart of the matter. And if the government wanted, it could have a program that would reinstate peasant communities to their land.
Well, Virginia Bouvier, what's the impact of the displacement and, of course, refugees flooding across the border into Ecuador, Venezuela, and so on? What impact is that having on Colombia's relations with its neighboring countries?
Well, Colombia's relations with neighbors are quite tense right now for a variety of reasons. You know, the places that have received most of the refugee flow are the neighboring countries, although the US and Canada have also, and Costa Rica have also been large recipients of refugees coming from Colombia. You have questions of territorial sovereignty, and I think a little bit of a spillover effect of the conflict going on in Colombia, especially into Venezuela and Ecuador right now.
And Virginia, what are the long-term what's the long-term impact on Colombia if this isn't resolved in the near future?
Well, I think Colombia really needs to deal with the conflict issue as a whole in order to deal with the refugee and displacement issue. Because until the conflict is resolved and the areas where people are flooding from are secured and people feel safe to go back home, you're going to have this marginalized population with nothing to do that's going to lead to more trouble.
All right. Ruby, I have just about 1 minute to go. Tell me, considering everything that's happened, are you at all optimistic you will return home eventually?
Sí, claro, siempre ha sido la esperanza.
Yes, of course, that has always been my hope, and not only my own hope, but the hope of the majority of the displaced population. That is to say, to once again have the tranquility that was there and in which we lived, the autonomy with which we lived and worked, and with which we shared life in our communities, and clearly a desire for a change for women and all the displaced, that there be tranquility, that women not be raped, that women not be abused, that children and the elderly not be abused. And to bring an end to this horrible situation of violence that is affecting the countryside in Colombia.
Unfortunately, I have to stop you there because we're out of time, but I thank you so much for coming in and talking about this. I'm glad we're able to cover this topic. Ladies, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us too, of course. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. You can give us your feedback on the show and post your questions and comments. On the next show, best-selling author and financial wizard Robert Kiyosaki says the wealthy are conspiring to keep the rest ignorant. He explains how you can make real money by beating the heavily controlled financial world and outdated school system. Make sure you tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.
todo.